Hello, I'm Chris Burns, and welcome to The Network, where we connect into a matrix of newsmakers to get to the heart of an issue. And watch out, they've got to answer in 25 seconds or less, or else. Let's take a look at that issue right now.
The surprise move by the French government to attack jihadist rebels in Mali followed the surprise rebel advance southward toward the capital, Bamako. But could the intervention spell quagmire? France and other Western countries had been waiting in vain for months for an African force to deploy. The multinational effort was to begin pushing the rebels out of the north, where they seized power nearly a year ago following a coup that weakened the Mali government. Now, as it props up its former colony, France risks reinforcing the perception of Françafrique, supporting corrupt rulers in exchange for trade. But the potential collapse of the Mali government was seen as having dire consequences, of turning Mali into a stateless, lawless Afrighanistan, sending millions fleeing. France has secured assistance from several countries, though no boots on the ground. Meanwhile, one leader said France opened the gates of hell. The risk of quagmire is there.
Wired into this edition of The Network is here from the European Parliament in Brussels, Arnaud Danjean, chairman of the Parliament's Subcommittee on Security and Defense, who has served as a French military analyst and advisor. From Bamako, Philippe Bolopion, UN Director of Human Rights Watch, which has been critical of both government and rebel forces in Mali. And from the Euronews Bureau in Brussels, Nicholas Westcott, who's Managing Director for Africa at the EU's External Action Service, which has pledged aid for Mali. Let's start with a question to all three of you, starting with Arnaud. Do you agree that France had no choice but to intervene? What would have been the worst-case scenario if France did not?
Well, absolutely no other option than counterattack, actually. It was not a deliberate attack from the French forces. It was a reaction to a jihadist rebel offensive on the southern Mali. And the consequences of that move would have been devastating for the Mali, but for the whole region as well. I think there was absolutely no other choice.
Philippe, from the humanitarian side, what would have been the consequences if France didn't intervene?
What's for sure is that the human rights situation in northern Mali was very, very bad and frankly unacceptable. For the last few months, Islamist groups were trying to impose a harsh ban on Sharia law, preventing people from watching TV, listening to music, smoking, telling women how to dress, amputating people accused of stealing things, for example. So the human rights situation was very bad. The question is, could it get worse now?
Okay, well, could it get worse, Nicholas?
Without the intervention, the rebels' intention had become clear. They were keen to seize as much territory as they could within the time that was available, and politics in southern Mali and the southern Malian army were in such a state that it would have been relatively easy to seize control of the whole state, and that would, as Arnaud has said, have disastrous consequences for the people of Mali, but likewise for the region.
But all of these good arguments to intervene, but then why is no one else offering boots on the ground, despite offers of logistical support? How isolated is France?
That's not the case.
Arnaud, what do you think?
Well, I don't think it's isolation as such. I mean, France was able to react because it had the capacities to do so, and also politically it's easier for France compared, for example, to Germany. Germany has to ask the parliament before moving any soldier. France can intervene very quickly.
Now, Philippe, do you regret that there's not more international involvement here in Mali?
Well, we certainly think, that at least the UN should step up its game. I mean, the intervention happened much faster than everyone expected. There was a resolution adopted only a few weeks ago that had a sort of carefully planned, step up for the UN. But what we think the UN should do urgently is deploy human rights monitors on the ground.
And Nick, what about EU involvement? The EU has pledged 50 million euros for the international force. But how much is that really going to help the situation?
The EU itself has committed to putting boots, at least on the parade ground, in training the Malian army to become more effective.
Right.
But the boots that will be on the ground are African ones that are beginning to arrive in Bamako already, and ultimately will form a force that will help the Malian army re-establish control of the north.
Okay,
and that will be largely funded by the European Union.
What's the chance of this becoming an Afrighanistan, a quagmire? if this drags on? Arnaud?
There is a risk, obviously. As soon as you intervene somewhere like this, there is the risk of being stuck in a situation that you cannot manage fully. At the same time, these groups, these terrorist groups are not as strong as the Taliban's, for example, are in Afghanistan. I think it will be a long time. It has to be sustained like an effort. Right. But militarily speaking, I don't think it will go that far.
With all this fractured alliances, patchwork of various clans and groups, could this be a quagmire to you, Philippe?
You could see a scenario, a sort of horror scenario where the French troops could liberate sometimes and open the way, pave the way for the Malian army to come in and commit very serious abuses, maybe with the help of ethnic militias. So it's a very risky situation. It's a huge responsibility for the French army to make sure that they don't become unwillingly complicit in further human rights abuses.
Okay, that is a danger, Nick. And how much faith do you have in an African force relieving French forces, and how soon can that happen? We're talking about a country that is twice the land area of France, and we're talking about a few thousand troops. How's that going to work?
The military process can secure physical control over an area, but only the political process will enable us to reconstruct a state, a government in Mali that all the people are content to live with. And that requires that we maintain our efforts of mediation, negotiation with all the groups in the north. That is what will decide whether it is a quagmire or not.
Arnaud, what are the chances of this conflict spreading and destabilizing neighboring countries? You're going to go visit there pretty soon. Is this hostage-taking, this mass hostage-taking in Algeria, an indication of that?
Of course, there is a risk of actions around, for example, in Niger. It could happen like we saw in South Algeria or in Mauritania. It's not a new phenomenon. I don't think, I mean, we're changing probably the scale of this battle, but the nature of it remains the same, and the vast area remains the same.
Philippe, how much do you see the danger of it spreading here?
Well, look, I think the danger is real, and I would say that there are two key factors to preventing this crisis from spreading out. One of them is the rule of law. You know, in the north, when the French army liberates these places, we need to make sure that there is police, that there is some sort of order, and that it doesn't become chaos. And the other key part is going to be justice. For many months now, pretty much all the actors involved in this crisis have committed atrocious human rights violations. There has been absolutely no consequence for them, and as long as you allow this to go on, people will commit the same crimes over and over again.
Nick, last question to you. Isn't this the real issue is a lack of development in the long run, or is the Sahel region simply condemned to becoming a no man's land and a haven for militants, extremists, terrorism, drug traffickers?
Our role is to make sure that does not happen, and development is an integral part of that. Philippe is absolutely right that the people who live there deserve justice and the rule of law, and they deserve the opportunity to develop in peace so they can become more prosperous. That will also be part of the long-term solution. The European Union is already giving support to neighbouring countries to try and avoid contagion, avoid the problem spreading. We want to be able to do that in Mali. We will support the government in order to enable it to bring basic services to the people. That is an integral part of what the European Union is trying to do.
Nick, thank you very much. Thanks to all of you. That's all the time we've got for now. I'd like to thank our guests Arnaud Danjean, Philippe Bolopion, and Nick Westcott. I'm Chris Burns, and until next time, thanks for connecting with The Network.